Hello, Internet. I'm Brett. This is Gareth, and we're going to talk to you today about Docker and some advanced stuff that we just heard about yesterday at VelocityConf. Quick intro, I'm Brett Fisher. This is my channel. If this is your first time here, I talk about Docker, DevOps, containers, Kubernetes, Swarm, all the things, container land nowadays. And today I have Gareth with me from Docker. You want to give an intro?
Yeah, sure. Cheers, Brett. So I'm Gareth Rushgrove, based out over in the UK. I'm a product manager at Docker for pretty much all things developer-facing. So I look after Docker Desktop as well as Compose, and interested in lots of the CLI tools.
Yeah, and we met, I don't know, like a year ago? Something like a year ago. At DockerCon, talking about Docker, well, your job.
Yeah, I guess I've been around.
Ago.
Yeah, I've been around the Docker community a good while. Sort of early user of Docker. I landed at Docker as an employee like just under a year ago. So.
Yeah, that's right, at the beginning of the year. And you, so you were at. I remember we talked about at DockerCon about the new Docker app, which is a really cool thing. You should definitely check out. That's on github.com/docker/app. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to actually talk about something cool I saw you do yesterday, which was really not a new feature, right? It was a multi-stage feature of Docker files that really was launched in 1706, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, so multistage builds have been around a while. There's a bunch of new things in basically behind a feature flag in the new 1809 release. So it's it's a combination of those, but it's also, I guess I was talking about not really the features as much as patterns for using them.
Yeah.
Like some of the multi-stage build stuff's been around a while. People are using it. But there's a few advanced patterns, especially with the new stuff that's in the 1809 release, that you can go you can do really quite powerful things. For, I guess, the main things I was talking about were speeding up builds, making more maintainable builds, and resulting in smaller images.
And the stuff we're talking about in the experimental in 1809 is the new build kit, right?
Yes, it's not actually in the experiment. It was experimental in 1803, I think. It's now just behind a feature flag. So it's there. If you've got the latest desktop, you'll have this. It's behind a feature flag because it doesn't quite have full feature parity with the existing Docker build. There's still bits of work to do. But yeah, this is us, and similar to the work we did with Containerd, where we took the fundamentals of the container runtime. Extracted them out from Docker, rebuilt it as a standalone library, then reintegrated it in. We're doing exactly the same thing with build, and BuildKit is the library where we're doing that work. Most people will just interact with it as Docker build. It will be the default builder in a future version. At the moment, you just need to set an environment variable to feature flag to it.
Yeah. And so today, we have, so even with 1809, if you just do a Docker build, you're still using the default builder that's been, we've known since the dawn of Docker,
yes.
right?
Yeah, that's still the sort of tools there. If you pass an environment variable, you'll be using the new builder.
Builder. Do you call it BuildKit internally, or is it that still the name? Is that what we're going to be referring to it, or?
Well, BuildKit's the name of the library under the hood.
Yeah.
But as it becomes just the default, from a Docker perspective, as it's the default you'll just type Docker build,
okay,
and you wouldn't need to set an environment variable. And in the same way as for some people, Containerd is actually really powerful, really interesting. If you're a plumber, if you're involved in building things at a low level, actually, if you're a Docker user, you benefit from all of that, but you don't really think in terms of Containerd. BuildKit's the same. It's a super powerful library if you're a plumber. If you want to build some custom build interfaces,
right?
It's a great library for doing things. Actually, if you're a Docker user, you're interested in building images, you'll just access it as you'll just type Docker build.
Yeah, maybe if you're a CI company, you care about that.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the Containerd is probably a lot of the people who are interested in that are like service providers or cloud providers, because they're looking at the fundamentals of the runtime. For most people, they want to use Docker. The fact that the technology under the hood is great and used in other places is a bonus because it makes it more stable and robust.
Yeah, sure. And I'm excited to see what other people play around with and use with it, because it's always nice to see these libraries, especially the Kit Docker's full of kits. We got kits everywhere. So to have yet another cool little repo to play with is fun. So we're here in London. You can see the background. That's the London. That's not London Bridge. That's Tower Bridge, right? Yeah. Was there the other day. So this is actually a photo. Obviously, we're not really standing. It would be too cold out there to do this. So we're here at VelocityConf, and we just finished up day 1. We're actually in the middle of day 2. And I was hoping that we could go through a couple of your examples from yesterday that I thought were really interesting, especially for people that are using Dockerfiles for a while, right? And they've got, the patterns I see are, Dockerfiles tend to get more and more complex over time, and you get teams, especially with maybe older languages. I know I work with people that have PHP a lot, and they tend to have sometimes 100+ lines of Dockerfile, maybe even 200 lines of Dockerfile, because they need all these tools and they need all this stuff in there, and it gets complicated. So maybe you could show us some cool stuff.
Yeah, I'll walk through some of the examples. And the talk yesterday, I sort of highlighted some of the features, but I was mainly trying to say, like, here are some ways you might use them. I got to skip over all of the sort of, I did a quick who's using Docker, and obviously everyone is. I got to skip all of the here's a Dockerfile, here's an introduction, here are the things in there. I got to skip over like Docker build, and just jump into some details. So let's
jump into
some examples
here. And of course, this, like you're saying, this really isn't a Dockerfile introduction. This is assuming that you have Dockerfile skills.
I managed to put the title as Advanced Build Patterns just to sort of ward off people who were like, I've not done this before, and I think that worked pretty well. It's quite nice just making loads of assumptions in a talk and not having to do the introduction.
Right.
So I'm going to do the same thing here as well.
Cool.
And I picked a Python example just because I quite like Python, and I don't do as much programming as I used to do. But I think the examples are sort of general purpose. At least you could build on them for different programming languages. But it's a nice little Python application that I was using. I'll just bring up the Dockerfile for the moment and sort of, I guess, like walk through. So this is partly like showing what's possible and a few things that had sort of been working for me in this example. And again, like standard stuff, sort of starting with an Alpine Python 3 image, just like I'm not going to bother installing Python. Someone's already maintains a decent image for that.
Yeah.
Most of this is sort of just the preamble for installing some Python dependencies.
Right.
Like that might be npm or gems or cargo or whatever like package manager you're using. I'm happy to be using pipenv, and so that like is specific to my Python bit, but it's sort of what you probably want to do for a load of examples.
Yeah.
And that's all that's in that first image. I just call it base. It underpins a lot of other things. You wouldn't really build that and then run it. And you could. It would jump you into a shell where those dependencies are installed, so it's useful for debugging, but not so super interesting so far.
And then we have a second from line, which if you haven't done multi-stage builds, is weird.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, like the Dockerfile originally was, you described a lot of instructions. Invariably, the first line would be from, then you'd have a lot of instructions, and you would run that, and it would build an image. What multi-stage build does is allow you to basically put what would have been multiple Dockerfiles previously in one. The sort of canonical example for this was, I guess, like people doing compiled languages like Go. You would have one Dockerfile which included the tool chain, all the compiler bits and pieces, and you would have that compile a binary. And that didn't need the tool chain to run, and you didn't want your image carrying around all of this compiler bits and pieces. The image is big, it's got a lot of things in there you don't need.
Your test stuff, your test data,
exactly.
all that stuff.
You would probably write a shell script that ran Docker build with one Dockerfile, then you would Docker copy something out, and then have another Dockerfile that copied that in and ran it, and that was your production one. And you're sort of spreading your build instructions between quite possibly multiple Dockerfiles and some shell script.
Automation.
And shell scripts pretty quickly get into being like works on my machine.
Yeah.
They're not super portable.
We used to call them intermediate images. I guess they're still called that, but yeah.
And multi-stage builds is really a way of formalizing the ability to have those intermediary images, but actually just in Dockerfile.
Right.
So we've got lots of them in here. The sort of the simpler example is really when you would have like the first one just has the compile tool chain, compile something, and the second one copies the binary from the other one, and we'll see that a bit later, and just has the runtime image.
Right.
But we're doing something a bit more complicated here because I got to do sort of talk on advanced patterns. So going through a bit, we start with the base. We start with all of the Python dependencies installed, and we give this sort of intermediary image a name, app, so I can refer to it later. And we copy in the source code. So this is the actual MyPython application. We then, again, we're leaving app on its own for the moment. We're starting with base, and we're creating test base. All we're doing here is actually reinstalling the dependencies, although some of them are already there. We're installing the dev dependencies. So
yep. So a bigger image.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to have more things in there. I don't want those things in at runtime, but they will allow me to build other images from that are for more testing purposes. For example, the next one. And this one's actually something that you might choose to actually directly build. The other is a sort of intermediary. And one of the sort of patterns that I haven't seen anyone else doing this, I'm sort of investigating at the moment, but here I've sort of made that, I've capitalized the stage name as test. That's a little hint to me that, oh yeah, that one is something you might want to build versus the other ones which are purely those intermediaries.
Right.
And all this one does is actually takes what we have already, which contains my application. It contains the development dependencies, because I've got test base rather than just base. And it's going to run PyTest, which is the test runner that I'm using for my application. Black is basically just a static analysis tool, sort of linting Python sort of stylist style stuff. So that's going to run the tests. I'll show that running in a second as well. I'll just fly through the others. Check is a different type of checks. Actually, that's a tool in Python for checking whether the Python dependencies we have in that image have known security vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Again, like separate image, I could do that in the same one, but it's quite nice to separate them. I've got another image which I can build, which will build me some documentation. So Pyco is a documentation generation tool for Python. Also, when I run this, I'm getting a bit more complicated here. When I run this image, it will start up a little web server, just the Python standard library one, on port 8000, serving the application documentation that we just generated. Another one with a shell. So here, I get that application. Note that this does not have the development dependencies. This would be the real thing. And instead of running the application as you would normally do with a Docker image, it's going to drop me straight into a Python shell. So I can actually debug that application in the context of the Python code.
So this would save you the time of not having to override that at the command line.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we make another intermediary one, which is sort of for releasing, basically the much more typical sort of like, this is an image you run and it's going to start up an application and run on some port. But I've then got two concrete versions of that I'm intending to run. One for dev purposes, just sets an environment variable.
Right.
And again, I could say, well, I could do that at runtime. I could just simply pass that as -e. But I need to know that. I need to document that. Encapsulating as an image in the Dockerfile gives me, it's in the config. It's in the code.
Right.
It's anyone reading this can go, oh, yeah, there's I can target that. And last but not least, this is sort of normally what you would just have really is I'm running this using a more production-like web server, GUnit on port 5000, so it's the same port as the release one. So
it's interesting though. I'm just realizing that a lot of stuff you're doing here, I would normally have had to override in compose files and have various compose files, like a compose file for development and then one that's meant for more production. But you're able to get this done all in the Dockerfile without that compose file dependency.
Yeah, and I think there are, again, building on patterns like this, we can probably auto-generate some of the other things on top of that. And although there's a number of different things going on here, individually, each one is really, the longest one is this one. It's really 4 lines of instructions, and it's assuming you know what Pico is, it's a documentation generator. Everything else is, the doc's going to be there. It's going to be run as a web server on this port. And rather than having the sort of longer Docker files, that are just lots and lots of instructions, we're able to sort of separate them up into different bits.
Yeah.
What we get out of that is ultimately we can build multiple images, but they all benefit from the same cache. So a lot of the ordering here is actually optimizing for cache reuse.
Right.
So let's see some of that actually working. So all of this is, and again, I've got the latest version of Docker Desktop. I've got the latest version of 1809. I've already set it, but we would set an environment variable called Docker_build_kit to basically value. So that was basically the feature flag. I'm on Windows here, so I'm using PowerShell, but you would just do export if you were on something else.
Now remind me, the reason we're using BuildKit here, because obviously the multi-stage build is not a new feature, but BuildKit gives us one on top of that.
Yeah. So actually, this example will work without me doing that. It will be slower because one of the things that BuildKit can do, and this really makes having multiple different intermediary images more powerful, is that it doesn't have to build all of them. Previously, multi-stage builds would build all of the stages in there. Actually, if we were to go back to the Dockerfile, if we trace this, that's actually a load of intermediary images it would need to build.
Yeah.
But if you actually, let's have a look at one. So, for example, if actually what I want to build is, if I just want to run the tests.
Yep.
Now I need test base. I need base. I don't need app. So why would it build that? Now, previously it would have done. With the new build features that we're enabling with the environment variable, it knows to skip intermediate stages that are not needed.
It's nothing that's going to result in the output is just tossed aside.
It's not basically just going through that file in a sort of the way a person would do. It's making a graph.
Yeah.
And we can just follow the graph as it's needed. That allows us to both actually skip stages that are not needed. Also, we can parallelize stages that actually can be done at the same time. All of that results in faster builds.
That's pretty cool.
So in some cases, if you've already got a multi-stage build, try it with the new environment variable. You might and time it both ways. You might see it go actually quite a bit faster, even without you doing anything.
Right.
But it also makes more complicated examples like this possible, because otherwise, as you added more intermediaries, you would just get slower. Now you won't. It'll do the right thing. So, again, it's just Docker build. The multi-stage build bits allow you to target individual stages.
Docker build.
Oh, yeah. That's like a typo. We can do -target and target individual build stages. Let's tag that. That's not new. All we're doing is running against. I've actually already got that cached, which is handy. We can. Some of the nice output as well with the new builder is the output is better.
Yeah.
So you actually get a lot more information. I'm not just inferring that it was cached from it going really fast. I'm inferring it as a cache because actually it's telling me.
Yeah.
And if we break the cache in some useful way, I can break one of the layers. So we're copying in. Actually, I'll change something else. Oh yeah, we can. This is a good one to break. So test was actually running our unit tests. The test here was actually just checking the application root. Basically returns a 200 status code. Well, it's not going to return a 210. So a few things will happen if I rerun that. One is I still get a lot of cached bits, but we've got a failing test. We only changed what we needed to change. That took longer, and it failed, so we did not build the image. Obviously, that's the sort of the explicit version. And again, that idea of having those capitalized stages as a way of as an indicator that these things are working. I actually have a Makefile because I quite like Make for collecting these things. It would actually be quite nice to generate some of this. But if you look, I've got...
Yeah, I think my battery's dying
oh,
on the camera.
Yeah.
We're still here, just the camera's battery's dying.
So
can you look for one in the bags?
For all those stages, I wrote this, but you could probably generate something like this if you had those strong conventions. I can run check, test, just using make and all the other sort of stages on here as well. So I'm going to skip to that just because it's easier to type.
Yeah.
But
I mean, someone if they were not a make person, but maybe they were like an NPM person, they could easily do this.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm just using it as a helpful way of skipping, running, writing the sort of longer commands. But you can do it directly, or you can store it in something like Make or any other sort of task running tool. But all of this is getting pushed into Docker. All of this is getting pushed into so all of this is running in the context of Docker. All of this is running using the same build cache. So again, I'm running the checks here. It can reuse the same layers. If we change one thing, let's do.
Yeah, look in there.
There's 3?
I think so, but I don't
So let's break some caches further up. I'm installing a package into my pip file, basically the dependencies for my Python application.
Yeah.
Insecure package is exactly what you think. It's a package which has a security vulnerability. It doesn't actually have a security vulnerability, but it's flagged as such for testing purposes.
Right. It's like one of those fake viruses that you
yeah,
can test
exactly.
your antivirus engine.
I've not got the virtual name set up. I will ignore that for the moment, but that would have broken the cache.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, Graham.
No problem. So, it was make prod, wasn't it? Would again, here I'm just running the application. It failed because I made a change to the. I broke the application yesterday, but normally that would work. That's running the application. Again, some of the tasks there are building an image and running it. Some of them are just building it.
Right.
And so one of the nice things there is you've been able to push all of that into a single Dockerfile. I've got a runner to help me run it, but that's sort of optional.
But it's not a script.
No, well,
right.
and the Makefile is not doing anything logical. It's literally just making it easy for me to run those things.
Right.
And it's totally optional. You could just write out the full commands. But all of the things are happening in Docker. All of them are just described in the Dockerfile. What that also allows for is similar running in both local environments. Here I've just got Docker on my desktop, but also in a CI environment.
Yeah.
And lots of CI tools are sort of going towards being more container native. Given that, my tests there run in Docker, my checks run in Docker. I had some unit tests for my images that just all run in Docker. Actually, converting that over to a CI system that's container native is really easy, and it's going to be the same thing as running it locally. There's always that issue, and people talk about works on my machine. Works on my machine, but then fails in CI is the sort of the new fails in production.
I've actually seen that happen, especially really complicated Jenkins systems, right? Like people that write, the build engineers that hit those super complex build workflows, but they don't, the developers can't do any of that on their local machine. They have to wait for the CI system to fail.
It's similar there as well as the problem we described to start with, where people would take a sort of multiple Docker files and a shell script. You're sort of spreading things across parts. So this, in front of us, is a cloud build config for the Google Cloud Builder service. But there's actually a load of different CI systems. It's not really specific to that one. But here, there's no, again, this is just mechanical, similar to the Dockerfile. It's just really mapping here. this one is running the tests.
Yep.
All it's doing is running a build with this target. This one's running the checks. All it's doing is this is really repetitive and mechanical in the same way as the Makefile is done. You could probably even generate them just from the Dockerfile if you wanted. But all of the actual work is in that Dockerfile. And we saw that Dockerfile, it's actually, yes, there's a number of different intermediate stages, but actually each one is really simple. And because it's all just happening in Docker, obviously, both in the CI system, if you went further and deployed this into production, the same, and locally, you do have that sort of recreatability that's sort of hard to achieve otherwise.
That's very cool. So, what's next for this? What do you think? Obviously, the community's got to start playing with this stuff and figuring out if this is what we want to do and if this is the right way to do it. I like the Gareth standard of capital letters.
Yeah,
I almost feel like we need a tree command to be able to see. You know what I mean? You get a complex enough Dockerfile, you don't know where the paths go through.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things going on. One is, I said at the moment, this is behind the new build stuff is behind that environment flag. That will basically just replace the main builder at some point. Really down to sort of stability and feature parity with the existing build stuff. There's not much there to do, but there's still some work. But it's now that I think people can explore workflow around that. And that's really what I was sort of kicking off with the talk at Velocity was, let's have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And the basic patterns around multi-stage build are sort of out there. But most of that's quite just, the feature. I can use multi-stage builds. Very common for building Python wheels or building, compiling JavaScript bits and then just copying those in, or compiling a Go binary. That's one pattern that's sort of there. That's a really good use case for multi-stage builds.
Yeah.
I think there's actually other things that we can do, and I'm sort of interested to see what people do, partly because of what you just alluded to there. It's possible to build tools on top of conventions.
Yeah.
I showed a Makefile and I showed a cloud config file. There's actually a load of duplication between both those two, and honestly, you could just mechanically generate those from what I did. That would work for this specific case, but actually, is the example I've shown generic? Is the idea of having this sort of public images? Does that public stages? Would that allow that sort of mechanical generation? Visualizing that again, being able to say, well, these are the intermediaries, and right. These are the public ones. You could definitely imagine building tools on top of that. And Dockerfile is superbly simple, but then what you then do later with it can sometimes not be. If we can have some of that actually, again, you'll always be able to do whatever you want, but if we can have higher level workflow oriented things around it, that's sort of interesting to me. We don't have to solve all problems there,
right?
But actually,
it's not the hammer to solve every nail, but yeah.
I don't think you ultimately raising the level of abstraction will make some things harder. We've got really good tools, and that Dockerfile can be turned to all sorts of purposes. But actually, I think having a routes where you go, but if you do it this way, here are some benefits of doing so.
Right.
We're not saying you can't do the things Dockerfile can be used in so many different ways, and you don't want to break that. That's a fundamental.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons for the new build stuff not being being behind this environment variable flag. Because it doesn't have parity with all of the features yet.
Oh, okay.
But actually, most of them are sort of edge cases, or there's some Windows-specific bits and pieces still to do.
Yeah.
But it's pretty close, and for most purposes, actually, it's just going to be better and faster. But now I think because of that, we can start thinking about the workflows on top.
Right.
I say the team who work on the sort of the plumbing of the build stuff have done a really good technical job of the optimizations they've done around the sort of the actual. There's a build intermediate format. There's a load of work around the parallelization and the graph building stuff. There's a load of other things in there around being able to write your own front ends and having remote caches, so we could actually share a build cache. There's loads of things in there.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in the developer workflow on top of that to benefit from that.
Right.
And so like conventions around the Dockerfile bits, reuse and maintainability of that. I'm sort of interested to see what people do.
Yeah, that's cool, and I'm glad this stuff's out there and that you're talking about it and getting people aware of these features, because I think there's so much to learn in the container ecosystem. It's really tough to realize that even some of the we're all pretty much using Dockerfiles, right? That's a universal standard right now, and to get us back to sort of the roots of our tooling, I think sometimes is a good reminder that we all probably have something we can still learn about the thing we use every day instead of learning some new high-end tool. So.
And without breaking that world, and there are more than 1 million public Dockerfiles on
GitHub,
and
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and the stability of Dockerfile, I think, has been a really good boon for that adoption. This isn't actually about a bunch of new features in there. The main things here are patterns, and that's sort of, I think, quite powerful. There's things we can do with the tools we have already that are potentially simplifying concerns.
So we actually have one question in the chat that we can answer from, I believe Asim is asking, can we run 3 containers with the same image and listening on the same ports on the same machine? Got the question after listening to your lecture on DNS round robin. So if you have, that's a good question, but that's not directly related to the multi-stage builds. That's more of a question of how does Docker networking work? And the short answer to that is essentially yes, they can with some caveats. So they all get their own IP address, so they're going to be able to listen on their own IP addresses in the Docker networking. If you're trying to publish them on the same port using the keyword publish, that's an option when you do Docker run. They can't do that. That's just sort of a general rule of TCP networking, is that only one application can listen or answer on a specific port. So in that case, you're probably going to want to look at a front-end proxy like HA proxy or Nginx or Traffic or something like that. So check out those tools. They'll help you run multiple things in the same port. But thanks for asking. This has been great. I'm glad we got to do this. Unfortunately, our fancy video camera failed, so we had to do a backup cam, which isn't as good looking. So apologies. But I'm glad you're here. I'm excited to see. We got DockerCon coming up in a month, so we'll both be there at DockerCon if you're going to be in Barcelona.
And there'll be a lot more examples of some of the new build bits and pieces in Docker at DockerCon. So if you're interested in that or anything else to do with Docker, there should be something for everyone, I would imagine.
It is the con of all things Docker. So where can people find you on the internet?
I'm Gareth Arm in most places on the internet. So just Twitter mainly, I think is probably the easiest place to track me down.
So people can reach out to you there. I'm Brett Fisher on Twitter, and obviously here on YouTube, you're already on the channel. So subscribe and hit the little bell if you want to see future videos when we go live and I do things about Docker and DevOps. And we'll see you next time on the internet. Thanks.